Sister told my parents I was a monster when I lived with her, so they didn't let me in when I drove. I drove 6 hours to surprise my mom for her birthday, and she slammed the door in my face. What I found out later, it destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. My name's Austin, and I'm 29 now. Everything I'm about to share started unraveling last year, when I was 28. My family's pretty typical. My mom, Dana, is 55, my dad, Richard, is 57, and my younger sister, Chloe, is 25. I always thought we were a pretty normal unit. At the time, I had a decent job and was living in a city about 5 hours away from my parents' place. I had my own apartment, covered all my expenses, and made sure to drive home for holidays and birthdays. Chloe and I weren't especially close as adults, mostly because we lived in different cities, but we got along fine. She'd been a handful as a teenager, though. If things didn't go her way, she'd make a scene out of it, blowing small problems way out of proportion. I figured it was just her age back then, and didn't think much of it once we both grew up. Then came the day everything flipped. I got laid off. The company I worked for started downsizing, and my role ended up on the chopping block. I didn't see it coming. I had a bit of a financial cushion, but not nearly enough to keep paying high city rent and bills without steady income. I hit the ground running, sent out applications every day for a month, went at interviews, but nothing came through. Not where I was living, at least. That's when I had to make a tough decision. Chloe, who lived about 5 hours away in a smaller town called Lenox, reached out when she heard about the layoff. She offered me her second bedroom, said I could stay as long as I needed, and that it really wasn't a big deal. At the time, it felt like the kind of support you dream of, like she was throwing me a rope while I was sinking. I took her up on the offer, figuring I'd stay for a couple of months, keep expenses down, and focus hard on landing a new job. I told her right away that I'd cover my share of groceries and chip in on the bills using my unemployment checks. I also offered to handle all the housework, cooking, cleaning, whatever she needed to make up for not paying rent. But staying with Chloe turned out to be nothing like I expected. The first few weeks were fine. I mostly stayed in my room, working on job applications, prepping for phone interviews, sending out follow-ups. I kept the place clean, made dinner every evening, stayed on top of laundry and dishes. When Chloe came home from her receptionist job at a dentist's office, everything was in order. Then, a few weeks in, things started to shift. She began coming home looking completely drained and pissed off. She'd toss her bag on the floor and start ranting about coworkers who were clueless, a manager who was unfair, or patients who were driving her nuts. The frustration in her voice got louder and more cutting. I'd try to be supportive, ask how she was doing, and she'd snap, telling me I didn't understand and to just leave her alone. One night, she came storming in and said her boss had officially warned her about being late again. I asked if she was okay or if I could help somehow. That's when she flipped, accused me of secretly enjoying the fact that I didn't have to work while she was out there grinding. I reminded her that I was contributing where I could, keeping the apartment running, and still actively searching for a job. She went from yelling to crying in seconds, said she couldn't handle all the pressure anymore. The next morning, she mumbled a half-hearted apology, blaming work stress. That became the cycle, explosions followed by silence or fake normalcy. And then came the strange accusations. She started blaming me for things I hadn't done. Said I was using her high-end shampoo even though I had a fresh bottle of my own. Claimed her mail was disappearing, though I hadn't touched her stuff. Then there was the incident with her car. She asked me to move it to avoid a parking ticket. I did, just moved it a block down and came back inside. Later that day, she stormed into my room, saying I'd scratched her bumper. We went outside and looked. There was a faint scuff on the back, but it was old, faded, like it had been there for years. Still, she insisted I caused it and went off on me for nearly an hour, calling me careless and ungrateful. Then she slammed her door and didn't speak to me until the next morning, when she acted completely cheerful, like nothing had happened. I was starting to feel like I was going nuts. My parents would call once a week or so, and I'd keep things upbeat. I didn't want to sound like I was whining about the situation, especially after Chloe had taken me in. So I'd say things were fine, and that I was still looking for work. But Chloe would often visit them in person, or have long, whispered phone conversations with Mom in her room. After those calls, my parents started sounding a bit colder with me. If I asked if something was wrong, they'd just say they were tired or stressed. That's when the gut feeling kicked in, like Chloe might be painting a different version of things to them behind my back. I kept applying for jobs, got a few remote interviews, even landed an in-person one in a city about an hour away. But none of them turned into offers. My savings were thinning out fast, and living with Chloe started to feel more and more suffocating. She began treating me like a personal assistant. Even if she was sprawled out on the couch watching TV, she'd order me around, asking me to run errands, grab groceries, pick up her prescriptions, like I was on her payroll. If I was in the middle of writing a cover letter or digging into a company's background for an upcoming interview, my sister would barge in and demand that I drive her across town to her friend's place, pick up her dry cleaning, or run out to the store for some snack she suddenly had a craving for. And if I told her I was busy, trying to land a job, no less, she'd absolutely lose it. Then, about 2 months after I moved in, everything hit the fan again. Chloe came home in the middle of the workday, sobbing like her world had just ended. She said her boss had fired her out of nowhere, that it wasn't fair and they just wanted her gone. She spent the rest of the day pacing the apartment, crying and yelling. At one point, I saw her hitting herself in the forehead with both fists, over and over, screaming that she had no idea what to do next, that her life was completely ruined. I tried to offer a little perspective, gently suggesting that maybe this could be a fresh start, that she could look for something new. She snapped at me immediately, said I must be thrilled she got fired, and then spat out, "Well, now you're not the only loser living here, huh?" The very next morning, I heard her on the phone with Mom, crying loud enough for me to hear through the wall. She was telling her how unfairly she'd been treated, how everything was falling apart. Now both of us were home all day, every day, jobless, frustrated, and the tension in that tiny apartment was unbearable. It was like living in a pressure cooker, and Chloe's moods were all over the place. One minute, she'd be acting like we were friends again, asking if I wanted to throw on a movie, and the next she'd be giving me the cold shoulder or blowing up at me for making noise just by breathing. She completely gave up on doing any chores. Her dirty dishes would pile up in the sink for days. Towels and clothes were left scattered on the bathroom floor. Food wrappers would be lying on the couch or the carpet, and if I didn't clean it all up, it just sat there. If I brought up any of it, even nicely like, "Hey, Chloe, mind rinsing your plate?" she'd accuse me of trying to control her or claim I was attacking her. Then it started getting really weird. She began saying I was out to sabotage her life, that I was jealous of her, or secretly trying to make her miserable. If I asked her to explain, she'd either stare blankly at me or walk out of the room like I hadn't said a word. That's when I started applying to every job I could find. Didn't matter what it was or where it was located. I just needed out. I was spending more and more time holed up in my room, door closed, trying to avoid setting her off. Around that time, my mom's 55th birthday was coming up. By then, I'd been staying with Chloe for almost 3.5 months, and things in the apartment were still tense, sometimes outright hostile. But no matter how bad things were, I wanted to do something for Mom. I still hadn't landed a job, and my money was dangerously low. I barely had enough cash for gas and a small birthday gift. I'd been living on cheap stuff like instant noodles and rice just to stretch every dollar. I came up with a plan. I'd drive down to their town on Mom's actual birthday, surprise her with a visit and a modest gift, and then turn around and drive straight back. It was a 12-hour round trip, 6 hours each way, but I figured the effort would show her I still cared, even if I couldn't afford anything fancy. I didn't tell Chloe about it. I worried she'd either try to guilt me into not going, insist on tagging along, or worse, call Mom and Dad ahead of time and ruin the surprise. The night before Mom's birthday, Chloe casually mentioned she'd be staying at a friend's place for a girls' night and wouldn't be back until late the next day. That made it easier. I could leave before she got up and be gone before she even realized. That afternoon, I used most of what little cash I had left, maybe around $40, to fill up the tank. By the time I went to bed, I had a couple bucks left in my wallet tops. I got up at 4 a.m. on Mom's birthday, got dressed quietly, scribbled a quick note for Chloe that just said I'd be out for the day, no details, and left it on the kitchen counter. Then I slipped out and hit the road. The streets were quiet at that hour, and the drive itself went smoothly. I had music playing and spent most of the time imagining how happy Mom would be when I showed up. I could picture her smile. I pulled into my old neighborhood around 10 a.m., nerves kicking in a little as I turned onto their street. My hands were sweaty on the wheel. I hadn't seen them in months, and I was hoping the surprise would lift everyone's spirits a bit. I parked in the driveway and walked up to the front door. Even though I still had my old key, I decided to knock. It just felt more respectful. My dad, Richard, answered. His face shifted the second he saw me, not with joy or surprise, but with this look of discomfort, almost like he'd just been caught off guard in the worst way. "Austin," he said, "what are you doing here?" I forced a smile and held up the little gift bag I'd brought. "Hey, Dad. I came to surprise Mom for her birthday." He didn't smile. In fact, he stepped halfway out onto the porch, pulling the door almost closed behind him like he didn't want me to come inside. "This really isn't a good time," he said. "You shouldn't have come today." I just stood there, completely confused. "What? Is something wrong? Is Mom okay?" "She's fine. Everything's fine," he said quickly. "It's just, today's not a good day. We already have plans." I asked again, trying to understand what was going on. That's when I heard voices inside, faint, but familiar. I definitely heard Mom. And then, out of nowhere, I heard Chloe's voice. Chloe. She was supposed to be at her friend's house. What was Chloe even doing here? She was supposed to be 5 or 6 hours away. Why was she at our parents' place first thing in the morning? Before I could make sense of anything, my mom, Carla, stepped into view and opened the door a bit more. The moment she saw me standing there, something shifted in her face. There was no smile, no surprise, just this expression of sadness and exhaustion, like she'd already been carrying the weight of something heavy. In a soft, almost trembling voice, she asked, "Austin, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" I tried to keep my tone light. "I came to surprise you, Mom. For your birthday." She glanced over at my dad, then back at me. "I appreciate that you thought of me." "Really, I do," she said gently. "But your dad's right. Today's not the best time for a visit. We've got other things going on. It's just better this way." So there I stood, on their porch, gift in hand, after a 6-hour drive, feeling like a complete fool. I couldn't wrap my head around it. "Better how?" I asked. "Can't I just come in for a few minutes, say happy birthday, give you your gift?" That's when Chloe showed up behind Mom, standing in the hallway with this smug little grin on her face, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. She didn't say a word, just stared at me like she'd won something. Then Mom looked at me again, her voice dropping even lower. "Austin, please. I just want a peaceful birthday. And, to be honest with you, I really didn't want you here today." Hearing that, "I didn't want you here," felt like someone twisting a knife in my chest. My dad suddenly cut in, his voice now sharp and commanding. "You need to leave, Austin. Get in your car and go." I stared at my mom, hoping this was some kind of awful misunderstanding, waiting for her to step in and say they didn't mean it like that. But nothing changed. It was real. After everything I'd done for them, after making that drive just to show I cared, this was the response I got. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. Something inside me just shut off. I went completely numb. I nodded once. "Okay." Then I turned around, walked back to my car, climbed in, and pulled away. The little birthday gift was still sitting untouched on the passenger seat. I drove in silence for nearly an hour, completely hollow inside. Eventually, I saw a rest stop up ahead and pulled in. I got out, took the gift bag, and without a second thought, dropped it into one of the oversized trash cans near the picnic tables. I didn't even hesitate. Then I got back in the car and drove the rest of the way back to Chloe's place, another 6 hours of nothing but the hum of the engine and my own spiraling thoughts. When I got back to her apartment, the place was dark. I didn't bother turning on more than a lamp. I went straight into the bedroom, dragged out my old duffel bag from under the bed, and started tossing in whatever clothes I could grab. My laptop, a charger, whatever I could fit. I didn't have a plan. I barely had any cash left, but I knew I couldn't stay there another night. Then I remembered a buddy of mine, Nate, who still lived back in the city I'd moved from. I picked up my phone and called him. Didn't go into details. I just told him I was in a bad spot and needed a place to crash for a few days. He didn't ask a single question. Just said, "Yeah, man. Come over." Doors open. Before leaving, I took Chloe's apartment key and set it on the kitchen counter. Found a sticky note, scribbled out, "I'm gone. Don't contact me." That was all. I checked my wallet, $20 maybe. Opened my banking app and transferred the last 100 I had in my account to Chloe. I added a note for electricity. Then I grabbed my bag, stepped out the door, and started the long drive back to the city I had once called home. The next few days were kind of a blur. Nate let me crash on his couch, made sure I had food, and most importantly, just let me be. No pressure, no pep talks. Just a place to breathe. But I knew I couldn't stay like that for long. I needed to figure things out, what was left of my life. So I made a tough call. I ended up selling my car. It was a few years old but still ran well, so I managed to get a few grand for it. It wasn't a life-changing amount, but it was enough to put down a deposit on a tiny room in a shared house in a rough part of town. I had just enough left over to stock up on some basic groceries, rice, canned stuff, cheap frozen meals. Roughly 2 weeks later, After applying to everything under the sun, I took the first job I was offered, working overnight shifts at a massive warehouse on the edge of the city, loading and unloading trucks. The pay was bottom of the barrel, and the labor wore me down to the bone, but it was a paycheck. It meant I could keep eating. In the days right after my mom's birthday disaster, my phone buzzed a few times with missed calls and texts, mostly from my parents and Chloe. I didn't respond. I didn't answer. After about a week of silence on my end, they stopped trying. That's when I blocked all their numbers. Then I went through my social media accounts and blocked them there, too. I made the decision that I was done completely, finally done. The image of my own mother looking me in the eye on her birthday and telling me she didn't want me there, after I'd driven 6 hours just to surprise her, was something I couldn't carry anymore. And the fact that my dad had ordered me off the property while Chloe stood behind them with that smug look. I didn't need a translator. The message was loud and clear. They didn't want me in their lives. So, I gave them exactly that. Those first few months were brutal. I was running on fumes emotionally, scraping by on every cent. That warehouse job broke me down physically. I dragged myself home just as the sun started to rise, covered in dust and sweat, crashed straight into bed, and do it all over again the next night. I survived on the cheapest food I could find, bags of pasta, eggs, bread. I didn't go out, didn't socialize. Most days, I didn't talk to anyone. My friend Nate would check in now, and then send a text or give me a call, but I usually told him I was slammed or too wiped out to talk. The truth was, I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just kept my head down and focused on surviving. The immediate result of cutting everyone off was that I became completely, utterly alone. But weirdly, there was a kind of dark peace in that. No more drama. No more walking on eggshells. No more twisted guilt. Nearly 8 months passed like that. 8 months of the same routine. Work, sleep, eat, repeat. Around the 6-month mark, I got lucky. Found a slightly better job as a data entry clerk for a small logistics company. Still wasn't glamorous, but it was during the day, and it didn't destroy my back like the warehouse shifts did. I was still living in that same noisy room in the shared house. The walls were thin, the neighbors were loud, and the whole block had this worn-down vibe to it, but it was affordable. I'd managed to save up a little again, maybe a few $1,000s. Through all that time, I never heard from my parents or Chloe again. No calls, no emails, nothing. I figured they had just written me off entirely, moved on with their lives, exactly like I was trying to do. And as much as it still gnawed at me, I stopped asking why they had treated me like that on Mom's birthday. I never got an explanation. Never got closure. Eventually, I just accepted that I probably never would. Whatever had happened, whatever version of me they decided to believe, I wasn't part of their world anymore. That was their choice. Then, about 2 weeks ago, something I didn't expect popped up. I got a message on social media. It was from my aunt, my mom's older sister. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year either, but I'd never blocked her like I had the others. Her message was short, almost abrupt. She said she was really worried about my mom, that something was wrong. She mentioned that Mom had been deeply unhappy and that there was a lot of tension in the family, though she didn't want to get into details through a message. She ended by saying she thought I should try calling my mom. I read it once, maybe twice, and then I just let it sit. I didn't respond. Didn't feel anything. No pull to reach out. No curiosity. Just nothing. Why would I call her? After the way they cast me out, I didn't expect anything. But then a few days later, I got an email. I recognized the address immediately. It was from my dad. The subject line just read, "Your mom misses you." I opened it. He wrote that my mom hadn't been doing well, that she missed me deeply. Then he said something vague, along the lines of, "Things were really complicated back then, and maybe we all misunderstood what was going on." He asked if I'd be open to talking. That line, "misunderstood the situation," honestly made my blood boil. How do you misunderstand your own father telling you to leave his house? Or your mother looking you dead in the eye on her birthday and saying she didn't want you there? No confusion there. It was clear. It was direct. It hurt like hell, but it wasn't complicated. I never wrote back. I still haven't. Truth is, I don't even know what I'm hoping for by writing all this. Maybe I just needed to say it out loud, somewhere someone else might read it. Maybe what I'm really wondering is, would I be in the wrong if I kept ignoring them? If I never responded, never reopened that door? What could they possibly say now that would undo how they made me feel? My mom's rejection. My dad shutting the door on me. Chloe standing behind them, smug and silent. Is there even a point in giving them another chance? Update 1. First off, I just want to say thank you to everyone who actually took the time to read through my long story and leave a comment. I didn't expect that kind of response. It means more than I can say. A bunch of people asked if I had left anything major out, like whether Chloe and I had any massive fights I hadn't mentioned, or whether I'd ever laid it all out for my parents. Told them directly how bad things really were while I was living with her. The honest answer? No, I never spelled it out. I'd occasionally mention on the phone that living with Chloe was stressful or that we had different ways of doing things, but I always tried to tone it down. I didn't want to sound like I was whining. I didn't want to stir up a fight between them and her. I figured they already knew she could be dramatic. She'd been that way as a teenager, pulling stunts and scenes when things didn't go her way. But this version of her was something entirely different. It was like I'd moved in with a stranger. A lot of people brought up the possibility that Chloe had been bad-mouthing me to our parents. And looking back now, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, during those months, they got colder and more distant in every call. Chloe was visiting them at least every couple of weeks, and she was constantly on the phone with Mom. Doors closed, voices muffled. I couldn't make out what was being said, but I could tell from the tone that she was often upset, sometimes even crying. Back then, I assumed she was venting about her job or something. But now I wonder if she'd been slowly poisoning the well, turning them against me. A few folks also asked about the money. When I was getting unemployment benefits, I gave Chloe somewhere between $200 and $250 a month in cash, specifically for utilities. That was a pretty big chunk of what I had. On top of that, I paid for all my own food, my phone bill, my car insurance, gas, everything. At the beginning, for the first 2 months or so, I cooked dinner for both of us almost every night. But she eventually started complaining, said my meals were too bland or not what she felt like eating. So I stopped and started making food just for myself. I still did all the grocery shopping. She'd give me a list, sometimes hand me some cash, but it was often not enough to cover everything she asked for, so I'd end up paying the difference from my own pocket. I also handled all the cleaning in the shared spaces. I cleaned up after her constantly. Her dishes, her trash, her laundry left around the place. I was doing everything I could to not be a burden, to be helpful, to be respectful. And still, they turned on me. Some people pointed out how extreme my parents' reaction was on Mom's birthday, especially for something as simple as me showing up unannounced. I've thought about that a lot, too. Their rejection wasn't just firm, it was ice cold. And not just my dad, it was my mom, too. Her words weren't about being surprised or caught off guard. It felt deeper, personal, like something had been festering for a while, which makes it all the more likely that Chloe had been feeding them lies about me for months. That would explain the shift in how they treated me. Their sudden distance, the way they looked at me like I didn't belong. And now, this vague email from my dad, talking about a misunderstanding. That line has been bouncing around in my head ever since. Even though I'm still angry, still hurt to my core, there's this small, stupid part of me that remembers what we used to be like as a family. The way things were years ago, before everything fell apart. That part of me wants to know what he meant. What misunderstanding he thinks explains all this. I don't want reconciliation. I don't want things to go back to how they were. I'm not even sure I want to forgive them. But then I saw a comment from someone suggesting I could reply, just one line. No emotion, no opening the floodgates. Just a short response asking my dad to explain what misunderstanding he was talking about. Nothing more. And for the first time since that day on the porch, I actually thought, maybe. That felt like a way I could possibly get some kind of answer, without opening myself up too much. So, I went for it. It actually took me about a week after getting my dad's email to work up the nerve. I kept writing drafts, deleting them, rewriting, second-guessing every word. Eventually, I just stripped it down to the bare minimum and sent something simple and direct. I wrote, "Dad, your message wasn't clear. Before I even consider having a conversation, I need you to explain, in plain English, what exactly you meant by misunderstood the situation on Mom's birthday. I also want a direct explanation for why I was told to leave and why Mom said she didn't want me there. If you can't be clear and honest about that, then there's nothing left to talk about." I didn't include any emotion. I didn't tell him how much they hurt me or how much anger I still carried. I just asked for the facts. Then I hit send and tried to push it out of my mind. Honestly, I expected one of two things, either no reply at all or a defensive, angry response. But 2 days later, I got a reply. And it wasn't what I thought it would be. My dad actually laid it all out. It was the first time in this whole mess that I felt like I was finally getting the truth. He said that on the morning of Mom's birthday, literally just before I showed up, Chloe had a full-on meltdown in front of them. He explained that for weeks, maybe even months, she'd been feeding them these horrifying stories about me. According to her, I'd been stealing cash from her purse and even accessing her bank account without permission. She told them I'd been trying to sabotage her job, and before she was fired, she claimed I'd anonymously contacted her workplace to spread vicious lies about her to her boss. And then it got worse. She showed them bruises on her arms. Dad said that at the time, they believed they were from me. Chloe had told them I'd gotten physical during fights, that I'd grabbed her and shook her, even pushed her down at one point. He admitted in the email that, looking back, the bruises didn't make a lot of sense, like something she could have easily done to herself, especially considering how worked up and emotional she was when she showed them. She told them I was emotionally cruel, that I constantly insulted her, called her names, made her feel unsafe in her own apartment. She convinced them I was spiraling from losing my job and lashing out at her out of bitterness and frustration. And because she'd been planting these stories slowly over time, by the time her emotional breakdown hit on Mom's birthday, they were already completely sold on her version of things. He said that when I showed up out of the blue, cheerful and clueless, it looked to them like some kind of twisted power play, that I was just there to stir the pot and ruin Mom's day. Chloe even told them that if they let me in the house, she'd leave immediately and never come back. Dad admitted they felt backed into a corner, like they had to make a choice in that moment, between letting me stay or protecting what they believed was Chloe's safety and mental well-being. He said they didn't stop to think, didn't ask me anything, didn't question the stories. They just reacted. Then things shifted. He wrote that after I cut all contact, and Chloe ended up moving back in with them a few months later, after losing her job and refusing to look for another, they started to notice some cracks in her stories and in her behavior. He told me Chloe had started having huge emotional outbursts at home, the same kind I saw. One time, she trashed her entire bedroom during a screaming fight with Mom over something as small as being asked to help clean the kitchen. She also began taking money from Dad's wallet and Mom's purse without asking. When they confronted her, she'd either deny it outright or throw a full-on tantrum. But the real shift came a few weeks before he sent me the email. Mom had been cleaning out the upstairs closet and found an old box of Chloe's paperwork, including bank statements from the time I was staying with her. Those statements told a very different story. Chloe had been spending hundreds, sometimes more, on online shopping, makeup hauls, expensive takeout, and boutique clothing. And this was the exact same time period when she'd been telling my parents that I was stealing all her money and she could barely afford to eat. That moment opened their eyes. Combined with her increasingly erratic behavior at home, they finally started to realize she had likely made the whole thing up. Dad ended the email by saying he understood if I was still furious and that he wasn't trying to make excuses. He just wanted me to understand the bigger picture, what they had been dealing with, what they believed at the time. He asked, in a much softer, humbler tone than anything I'd heard from him in years, if I might consider reaching out to Mom. He said she cried about me often, that she was overwhelmed with guilt, that she missed me. I must have read that message 10 times over. I kept thinking, my own sister had tried, very deliberately, to destroy my relationship with my parents. And they believed her. She said I was a thief, a manipulator, that I physically hurt her, that I was a danger. And my parents believed every word. None of it, not a single part, was true. She built this entire false reality, casting me as some violent, manipulative thief, and my parents had bought into it completely. They didn't just fall for a few exaggerations. They believed I was someone capable of stealing from my own sister and physically hurting her. That version of me never existed. The thing that still unsettles me the most is the part about the bruises. I have no idea where they came from, but I know, without a doubt, that I never laid a hand on her. The thought that Chloe might have harmed herself just to make her lies more convincing, that chilled me to the bone. But then I remembered the way she'd slammed her fists against her own temples after getting fired, and how she threw that vase across the apartment like it was nothing. Suddenly, it didn't seem so far-fetched. I haven't responded to my dad's second email. Having this context shifts the story, but it doesn't erase what happened. Knowing they were lied to doesn't change the fact that they kicked me out without a word of hesitation. What really stood out was Dad admitting they didn't start to question things until Chloe's chaos started affecting them. When her lies only hurt me, they didn't ask questions. But once it disrupted their peace, that's when they opened their eyes. Update 2. It's been just over a year since I wrote my first post, and about 10 months since I shared my first update, the one where I revealed everything my dad told me in that long email, the truth behind the accusations Chloe made, and the way it warped my parents' view of me. After I read that email, I took my time. Weeks went by before I said anything. What he wrote explained their actions that day on the porch, but it didn't excuse them. That's the line I couldn't get past. They believed terrible things about me, things they never even paused to verify. And they believed them because they came from someone they already knew could be volatile and manipulative. They assumed I was capable of doing things that would have horrified me. During those weeks, my dad sent one more short message. It just said he hoped I'd consider talking someday. Then my mom sent her first message since before her birthday, the first time I'd heard from her directly in over a year. Her email was overflowing with guilt. She said she was sorry, so sorry, that she'd ever believed Chloe. She called herself a failure as a mother. She said she missed me every single day. She mentioned that Chloe was now getting help, but didn't say what kind of help or what triggered it. Just that something serious had happened recently at their house, and it pushed things to a breaking point. Despite all this, I didn't reach back to rebuild anything. Eventually, I sent one last email to my dad and asked him to share it with Mom. In it, I said I understood their explanation. I acknowledged the manipulation Chloe had put them through. But I also made it clear that what hurt most was how quickly they abandoned me, that their lack of trust in me, how easily they accepted the worst without even asking for my side, had broken something I didn't know how to repair. I told them I wasn't ready to resume any kind of relationship. Maybe one day I would be. Maybe not. But it had to be on my terms. I asked them not to contact me again unless I initiated it. And to their credit, they respected that. I haven't heard a word from them since. It's been 9 months now. The only thing I've received is a Christmas card from my aunt, my mom's sister. She scribbled a short note saying, "Your mom still talks about you constantly. She's struggling." I didn't respond. So that's where things stand. My relationship with my parents doesn't exist anymore. What happened on that porch on my mom's birthday wasn't just a low point. It was the breaking point. And even though the truth eventually came out, the damage was already done. Chloe's lies didn't pull me back in. They confirmed just how toxic things had become, and how easily my family had turned against me. I don't expect to post any more updates. Honestly, I only shared my story in the first place to get it out of my system, to figure out if I was wrong for walking away. Reading all your responses, seeing the support, and even hearing your own stories, that helped me feel a little less alone. Life is much quieter now. And while the hurt still lingers, it's not the sharp, raw pain it used to be. It's more like a scar now, faded, but there. A reminder of what I've been through. I'm focused on moving forward, building something better, on my own terms. If you've ever gone through something similar, just know you're not alone. And no, you're not wrong for protecting your peace. This will be the last time I write about any of this. Thank you for listening.